Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, John will be there.
Oh, totally. Yep.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and call this confirmation hearing to order on Cheryl Evans, the appointee for the Human Resources Department. We'll go ahead and start with introductions.
Austin K. Davidson. Suzanne LaFrance. Meg Salato.
Peterson. Forrest Dunbar.
John Weddleton.
And Felix Rivera. And go ahead and turn it over to you to introduce yourself, Cheryl.
I am Cheryl Evans. I am, do you want to tell me about yourself, sort of? Okay. Born and raised in Alaska, spent most of my time in Anchorage. Spent 8 years in Fairbanks, attended the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and I got a bachelor's of business degree, minor in human resources. Began working at the University Geophysical Institute shortly thereafter. Got my professional human resources certification shortly out of school. Went on to work at the State of Alaska Department of Transportation in Fairbanks, where I was responsible for drug and alcohol program, recruiting, and labor relations. Moved to Fairbanks moved back to Anchorage in 2001, where I started working for the Alaska Railroad. I worked there for 8 years as the manager of recruiting. It was my responsibility to ensure that we were able to meet all the demands of the entire 900-person railroad. Primarily, the recruiting came in the form of, in the largest part of passenger service season. I was also responsible as backup to the drug and alcohol program, which was a 24/7 operation due to the fact that trains run 24/7. Lots of labor relations, sat in on a number of collective bargaining, negotiating teams. I received my senior professional human resources certification in 2002, and it is still up to date. I transitioned from the railroad after 8 years to the private sector and worked as a director of human resources in a number of smaller firms. And then came to the municipality in March of this year, where I started as the Director of Employment Records and Classification. On a side note, I'm involved in Covenant House Alaska fairly heavily. I've been the co-chair for the Fire and Ice Committee gala that is one of the largest fundraising events of the year. Last year, I also stood up at a somewhat inopportune time when they were asking for volunteers to do the executive sleep out, which I did follow through on, and did that last November, and we participated in raising $1 million for that effort. I like to play golf, and I'm a certified sailor.
Okay, thank you for that introduction. Do we have any questions? Yes, Mr. Wells.
Do you have a sailboat?
I do not.
Because
I
if you
bareboat.
did,
It would be perfectly good, and I could go. I wish we did, but bareboat everywhere.
just checking. I have a friend who got a sailboat, and I never see him anymore.
Right.
I apologize if you said this and I missed it. Why did you leave the railroad?
They had a 40-person layoff, and I was part of it.
Thank you. Mrs. Franks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a general question, actually, for either you or Mr. Falsey, and just in regards to the position as HR director. It includes labor relations and recruitment, probably, I'm assuming, all policy, procedure, appraisals, etc. for personnel. Can you give a high-level summary of the position, or perhaps your understanding of that position and what the responsibilities cover?
With regard to code or
No, just
sorry.
this position as director.
Oh, well, it is covering employment, benefits, payroll, time management, classification, labor relations. I think I got them all. So the inner workings of the Human Resources Department and the oversight of that.
Okay. And may I follow up, Mr. Chair? So along with that, how do you view the department as supporting or contributing to or shaping the goals of the municipality and the mayor?
Critical.
How so?
Well, we're involved in the daily lives of everybody that works for the municipality, and I, many years ago, came to the realization that when you're working in human resources, you are dealing with people's lives every day, be it offering them a job or the benefits that you negotiate with a vendor, or leave or discipline or termination. And so it's something that you do have to do correctly and take it very seriously. And I think that's our role, is to get it right.
Thank you. And one more, and then I'll hold.
Okay.
And thank you, Ms. Owens. I heard that you have experience with recruitment and labor relations, and it sounds like in a number of different HR areas, from disciplinary action to hiring, firing, what have you. As far as employee engagement, and I don't know, how does the municipality measure employee engagement? Do you know, or do you have any thoughts, if it's not measured, how it ought to be, and how, if there is, what's an appropriate target, and how would you close the gap if, employees are overall disengaged?
I'm not sure I have an answer for you on that. I've been here 3 months, and so I don't feel that I've really been out in the field to really assess that. I think employee engagement is very important. It is something that, because we're so large, it would almost have to be on a agency by agency basis to assess the team, figure out where they're at and where they want to go, and then have HR involved in helping them get from here to there. I have met with a number of directors already in preparation for this transition, and the one thing that they're calling for is training. And they would like to get some form of a training program reinitialized in the muni on a number of different levels. And so I don't know, that would help, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So I have myself in the queue, and then you, Mr. Dunbar. Two things. So you said reinitialize training. So we used to have training, and then we stopped doing it?
That is my understanding.
Was it because of funding?
That is my understanding.
Okay. Yeah, money. Then SAP. So my understanding of the position is that there is a lot of interaction with SAP. In the time that you've been here, have you interacted with that, and are you ready to jump into that mess?
Yes, I have interacted with that. It is a challenge, and it is something. It is a huge demand on the human resources team every single day. We are dealing with testing. We are dealing with fixes and workarounds every day. We have to. It won't go away, and so that is something that is now on our plate as a constant. And so, some of the things that I've been looking at and hoping that we could achieve is we're going to have to make ourselves really efficient on the HR function side, because this is an unstable entity, if you will. We don't know how it's going to behave from one day to the next sometimes. And so if we can streamline and get our processes down to a really tight working machine, that will make this better and make this more tolerable, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Yeah, I was going to ask what your thoughts on SAP were, so he touched on that, but I kind of want to drill down a little bit more. We had heard from, I believe, Ms. Browse, that every city that had implemented SAP had experienced challenges, usually going about 2 years out. And so I guess my question is, do you see things significantly improving in about 6 months? And if not, is there any plan B? That is, if SAP appears to be broken and broken in a way that can't be resolved with some of our bargaining units, is there any plan B for we are going to stop using SAP for payroll functions, for example? Because I understand that some of the other functions work well. We're going to stop using SAP. We can try to use some other system for specific units that are challenging.
To the best of my knowledge, I don't know that we're abandoning SAP at any point. I had the opportunity to speak with the forgive me, I've forgotten her title. She came to us as a Toastmaster, but she was involved in human resources at the city of Tacoma. And she sat in my office, and I have a number of SAP codes up on my whiteboard, and she sat down and she goes, "Oh my," and I went, "What?" And she said, "You have SAP?" And I go, "Yeah," and she goes, "Oh, they've had it since 2002. They bought all the modules, they did all the things that they thought were appropriate," and she said it didn't really pay off. They still wrestle with it on a regular basis. So,
Yeah, I'd heard recently that, I think it was Marin County or maybe somewhere else in California, decided to just abandon it, basically. That they gave up, and I assume that they're going to sue them for quite a lot of money, and they went in a different direction. Have you given any thought to that?
well, I don't know that I'm in a position to actually make that sort of decision, given the amount of money that we're talking about.
Yep.
I will say that there have been times when I've wondered how much productivity is being impacted on the daily challenges associated with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Franks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So a general question, what do you see as the biggest challenge or challenges coming into this position, and what are you most excited about?
I'll answer the second question first. I enjoy being very busy. I enjoy having a variety of things going on. Sitting around kind of looking for things to do is not my strong suit. This job has it, and lots of activities and lots of things going on. I think the challenge is going to go back to what we've already discussed here. And I hate to keep bringing that up, but it is a challenge. And the SAP testing and so many things cascade upon one another in the back end that it is, and I do not even pretend to be an expert yet. I'm getting functional in the reporting and the looking up of the data and things such as that, but we have a number of people that are SMEs and they're very good at what they do. I think the instability of the system is a challenge, because what it may do today, it may not do that tomorrow. So, it'd be one thing if you said, okay, we fixed this, and now we're going downstream, and that's good. But from my understanding, it doesn't necessarily stay that way.
So I was halfway expecting you to say maybe the cost of healthcare as one.
Well, that's a challenge as well.
And I don't know if it's good or bad that that's less of a challenge than SAP. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, given the amount we paid for the system, I think I would have hoped it would have been a higher performer than it was.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Welton.
Well, I got a question, but I make a comment too. So if it's not doing the same answer every time you use it, see, that's artificial intelligence. As it becomes more human. Some amount of what you do will be negotiating contracts. It's probably I imagine that's ongoing. It's always something.
Collective bargaining.
Collective bargaining and stuff. So we have some assembly guidance from 10 years ago that just basically says their raises can't be over the rolling average of the inflation. I think that was basically it. Maybe some other ones. Maybe you're familiar with that, and is that helpful? Does that become? How does that play into your negotiations then?
Well, we follow your guidance.
Is that your starting point? Everybody comes in and says we can't go over that percent.
That's the line that we hold.
We did get one contract that was much higher. I think the plumbers came in with like 5% or something and rejected it. And then it went back, or you rejected it, and it went to arbitration, and we refused arbitrator's results.
Oh, this is a while ago.
Yeah, it was a while ago, but that didn't follow our inflation deal.
So we do, part of when we start negotiations, we...
You might have to come up and speak loudly into this.
Reserved for interpreters.
Say your name.
Okay, Karen Northworthy. I am the current Human Resource Director, soon retiring. When we sit down with the unions to negotiate, part of what we do is we share the guidance with them so they know this is the guidance that we're working under. And so when we look at the guidance of the last one asked for that for benefits that the employees start paying more of a portion of it. That we do the CPI within 3 years. We do an average. We don't exceed that. And that you didn't want the contracts more than 3 years. So those are some of the criteria that we use, and so the unions know not to come in, not to say that they don't when they're giving us their financial package and they say, I want 5% every year, and we don't want to pay anything for benefits. And we're like, well, we have this guidance, and here is the bucket of money that we're working with, and there's a lot of back and forth. I'm going to say we just finished 302. They ratified the contract yesterday. You will be seeing it. We're introducing it on the 18th. We kept within your guidance on absolutely everything. So I think we did a really good job with that contract. So the employees are paying more. We went to a 90-10 in 2021. There's no wage increase in 2021 and only 1% for the 2 outlying years. So yeah.
Okay, thanks. And I wasn't. It looks to me like we're following that guidance when we do, except for that one case. And but I don't. So it's good to hear this because I don't really know what is the dynamics. It was just like, that's advisory, that's them. Where do we really want to be? But that is a starting point and is valuable too. So if that's the case, is there other guidance we could give that would help you, or just help the negotiations, not necessarily one side or the other?
Well, I think you would have to perhaps look at. Well, it depends on the union. If healthcare is something that we need to seriously be addressing costs on, that would be something else that you might want to perhaps look at. It's.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, as far as I know, we've always followed the guidance, except for maybe that plumber's contract, but that was before we were all here. I mean, you were here,
I was here.
2014 or something.
I was here for it.
Yeah.
No, there was another one
Yeah.
that we went to non-binding arbitration. Remember that?
No, I don't.
It was like 2 years ago. It was plumbers and pipe fitters, and we rejected it, and then we moved to reconsider it, and then we passed it. But I can't remember. I don't remember it being.
We did not pass it.
We
It was
implemented-
rejected, and it went to the city's version, and then they came back 6 months later. With wage changes again.
Okay.
Some wages went up, some went down.
So what we did is we implemented the last best offer through
Yeah.
that process. Then we had a component that happened a little bit after negotiations. The contract was in place because we agreed to take a look at some of their classifications, and we looked at and did a comparison within the other similar positions throughout the city. And so we looked at that, and then we made some adjustments. So what you saw was an administrative agreement to change some of the pay grades on those, because we did this analysis across and we made some adjustments. So I think that's what you're thinking about there. I'm going to be bold.
As to your question about what would be helpful with the guidance, in some ways it just depends on your policy goals. The most critical thing is that the guidance is really guidance, that it has targets, it has something quantifiable, because then we have something to talk about. It's just sort of like keep the following things in mind, then we don't start in any particular place and we're always making it up from scratch.
But the current one does say, at least with the raises, the average of the 3
Yeah.
years.
It is.
But it doesn't say for benefits. It said try to cut the costs or whatever.
Well, you
Just have
do.
a goal.
It says
You want the employees. You want the employees to pay more of the benefit costs, because in some cases we were paying the entire cost for the employees, and so you're seeing us, working with the unions so that the employees are paying part of that. So with 302, you're going to see that they're now going to pay 10%.
And for the new members, that guidance goes back to Sullivan. I think that is Bill Starr, Dan Coffey's name really on that one, I think. But it's not a crazy position. And I think, and maybe I'm naive about this, that unless you think a collective bargaining group has been systemically mispaid, that they're just as a group out of proportion to the market, or they have become wildly more productive with the same amount of resources, then the bargain should really be kind of keeping up with inflation. And you could do that by saying, like, we're really going to true it up with inflation, but that mechanically is pretty difficult. So that the guidance says is you take this 3-year average of the
It's
last
5, isn't it?
Yes, it is
3 or
5 years.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
But so we're basically just sort of truing it up for inflation. And then on the benefit side, that we are trying to put more responsibility on employees. But having a hard target on benefits is a little more tricky, because if medical CPI just goes up 10%, and we have a hard split on how that's to be borne, we can just be across the board cutting wages. I mean, we'll just take money from people for doing the same job because the benefits cost more. Maybe that's a policy directive some people are interested in. I don't think we've ever implemented it that way. But so all of it is to say is that I think we don't really have real qualms with the current guidance.
I actually have a cue here. Thank you. Mr. Dunbar, and then Ms. Alatel, then Ms. Quinn-Davids.
Right, so the policy guidance is from 2010, and I've read it, and I keep hearing this number 1.5, but 1.5 isn't in there. So, my understanding, so 1.5 is the CPI average over those 5 years. That's where we're getting 1.5 from?
Recently, now it's 1.2.
Okay, so it was 1.5, now it's 1.2, and it's based on that CPI.
Right, the
Okay.
average, yeah.
And how often did we update, and maybe nobody here has institutional knowledge to say this, but how often was that policy, it's been 9 years, how often was that updated in the past?
Not that often, but I will say, well, at some point, if you give me the opportunity, there is one thing that I think would be helpful to change. But
When you say not often, like once a decade, once every 5 years, once every 3 years?
typically, it depends on the assembly. We give you notice when we're getting ready to go into negotiations, and typically you'll look at it and go, yeah, we don't want to make any changes to our guidance and that. It hadn't been done quite a bit until this one was done. That was kind of a really big change and difference. That's when you guys really set some criteria and hard guidelines for us.
2010.
Yes. So one of the big things that happened at that time is we were doing typically 5-year contracts with some of the unions. Because I will tell you that now that we can't do that for more than 3, and so what's happening is labor relations is constantly negotiating contracts because it is a very long process and a lot of work that goes into that. And I've talked to Bill, hopefully he won't mind.
We're on board with this.
Is that I think that we need to go back to the 5 years to give us a little bit more breathing room in work. Because we have so many guidelines that we have to follow when we enter negotiations, and it really takes up a lot of time. If we could go back to having 5-year contracts, some of the concerns on why it was 3 was because we were negotiating 5 years out for salary increases. So thinking back to 2009, where we had a lot of contracts, they were getting 3% increases and all of that, and then we had to try and pull them back because of the budget crisis. So my proposal to Bill has been, if we did 5-year, if you would allow us to go out to 5 years again, maybe what we did in years 4 and 5 of the contracts is that we just did openers for wages and benefits, so that we're not opening the whole contract each time. Because every time we open the contract, we're negotiating every single item in that contract. And now brace yourself, people, because anytime we're negotiating, it also means when we're making changes in that contract can impact that we have to make changes in configuration in SAP. So it's this vicious cycle. So if we could spread it out, that means that we'd have longer contract periods, we'd have more time to be working with the departments on some of their employees and training issues instead of we have to focus all these resources on negotiating contracts all the time.
And so in preparing for the future Cheryl Evans era, you asked Karen what's on her bucket list of things to finish before she walks out the door. And much like changing the leave cash-out schedule to smooth payroll's workload, that's what's really motivating this potential proposal, which I think we will bring to you in some form, say, hey, one thing you can change in the guidance is let us negotiate longer contracts so we are negotiating less frequently. I think there was a concern at the time. You didn't want an outgoing mayor to punch in a contract that was going to wipe out the future mayor's ability to make changes for like the whole term. That's not a frivolous objection or concern. But what Karen's proposal might be to thread that needle by saying all of this, the terms that are less sexy, that are less likely to get a lot of attention, those would be fixed, but the future mayor in year 4 and 5 would negotiate salary and benefits. So the big dial of moving money would still be untethered.
Thank you. Ms. Alatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
back to the 7. I'm curious what your ideas or strategies or thoughts are with regard to retention and recoupment of great staff for the municipality, particularly in the economic climate and the uncertainty our state has.
Well, I think it comes down to clearly identifying what role you're trying to fill and posting it and not hiring someone into it that is not qualified. That sounds like a very simplified version of it. If you're talking about sourcing people from outside or something like that, I'm not exactly sure. We don't have the resources to really relocate folks. I think it comes down to doing a really good job of hiring and vetting the people that you are hiring and keeping them engaged and retain them and care for them.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
It was actually just more on the guidelines, and I think we'll save that for another day. But
Thank you. All right. Sure, Mr. Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And since you've been working in the department, do you think we're losing good employees just because they're frustrated with the SAP?
I have not seen anybody leave because of it. I have seen frustration because of it. We have a lot of people that have a very solid knowledge base of how to work within it. I think there is frequent frustration of the amount of workarounds and testing that they have to do. I don't know how sustainable that level of frustration is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any more questions? All right. So I just want to say thank you, Ms. Noseworthy, for your service to the municipality. We're going to miss you. And look forward to the discussion and vote on Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you.